What up, peeps, and welcome to a Finance Guy podcast, a show for all genders and species about bringing some humanity and a bit of fun to the world of finance and tech and leaving you with a little something that can help you on your way. All right, please enjoy. Thanks. All right, welcome to another episode of the Finance Guys and Tech podcast and Finance Guys TV. Today we have special guest joining us, Mr. Brent Holley. Brent, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We'll read a quick, short bio, but
where'd you get that?
We stalked you on LinkedIn and a phone tool, just like we do kind of before with all our guests. So we'll see. Maybe you'll be surprised by some of this, but I don't think so. What we found is that Brent has an MBA from Texas A&M.
That's correct.
And you are our second Aggie on the show. We had Gretchen on, who is also
an Aggie. That's right.
Yeah. And then you spent almost 10 years.
Does count as three though? Because I went to A&M twice.
You
for
did
undergrad and grad later on.
That'll count. We'll give you
three.
We'll give you a double.
Three
there.
Aggies now.
We'll give you a double.
Right.
Were you from Texas too, or did you just end up down there?
Well, my family's from Texas. I was technically born out of country. I was in Louisiana, but we moved back to the nation of Texas when I was 5.
Out of country.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. So you can't be president of Texas.
Well, not yet.
Not yet. Well, you also shared a similar background in that you spent 10 years at HP.
I was there 15.
You were there 15 years?
Yeah,
No kidding.
I joined as Compaq, and then shortly after that, they were purchased by Hewlett Packard.
Gotcha.
Then we split. Anyway, I was there quite a while.
You were there for a while at HP, and it looked like your Amazon origin was around February 2016.
It was.
I'm kind of skipping around to everything here, but we like to kind of open up with usually something a little bit different about our guests.
And there was also a stint in Malaysia that you did, right?
Yeah, I did about 2.5 years in Malaysia, based in Kuala Lumpur.
Oh, that's awesome.
Was that after undergrad?
Yeah. So my undergrad degree was in chemistry.
Yeah.
So I actually was working as a chemist for a number of years. Took a position internationally as kind of a country manager and sub-regional manager for a chemistry company, and then due to some other things, I ended up saying, hey, I'm going to get repatriated, and that was a good time to go back to MBA.
So I am a biochemical engineer, actually.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, you did like the full
did the full
schoolwork. I did like half schoolwork,
yeah. Yeah, but you were actually working in the chemical field, so that's great. So Brent, we have heard a lot about that you'd like to do go camping, go fishing, being in the woods. Is there a story behind it? Because Gaetano used to mention this a lot.
He would call me Hunter Killer.
Hunter Killer.
Yeah, I think that was his nickname for me. He got that I think he got that from Dixon. But so my father was an avid hunter, and as we grew up, he took his boys hunting with him. So that was part of what we did as a family when I was young, and didn't do it for a number of years, kind of in college age and early on in career, because you're prioritizing family over hobbies and stuff like that. But
sure.
As I've gotten kind of back into balancing my life and doing stuff, I found myself out in the woods, up in the mountains with my brother or my father or both. My last really exciting trip with my brother and my father and I, we went up to the Arctic Circle in Alaska.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
They dropped us off for a week and said, we'll come pick you up. And we hunted caribou for a week. That was super fun.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So did you guys do like a seaplane or like one of those?
Little float plane, little pipers, but since we were kind of in the inland area, they just have those big squishy tires, and they land on rocks. And,
and they just dropped you guys off like at a cabin with rations?
No cabin. No, we pitched a tent, and they gave us some basic rations, sleeping bags in the tent, a little Coleman stove, and we're good.
Wow.
Sat phone. We brought our own sat phone just in case something bad happened.
Right. And that's kind of like harkens back to when you guys were growing up. You used to kind of.
This is way more intense than when we were growing up, because we were in Texas for the most part, and it was like mostly private land and not a lot of mountains. And
when did you do this?
I did that trip the fall of 2015, so right before I came to Amazon.
Huh. Oh, very cool. And what was it like being out there for a week on end? Like, do you guys
just quiet?
do you just kind of like sit around the campfire at night and like have like a couple nips and like talk, or what is it's mostly just family bonding time. But I mean, you'll find yourself alternating between like a whole lot of quiet resting, trying to keep yourself focused on what you're doing, to just like I can't get air because you're walking up this hill with 100 pounds of pack on your back, and then in the evening you kind of like
shut it down and just relax and rest up and
Yeah.
do it another day.
And do you have kids?
I have 2 daughters. Yeah.
Okay. Did they take to the outdoors at all, or is that something?
Not my eldest. She's solid Houstonian, so she's back in Texas. Just got engaged, so she'll be married in September.
Oh, congratulations!
That's the current plan. So,
Nice.
And then my youngest is 19. She's here with us in Seattle, going to school. She likes being out and about, and is excited about going hiking and stuff like that. She hasn't gotten excited about hunting per se. But anyway, time will tell. We'll see. Whatever she likes, doesn't matter to me.
Very cool. So tell us then, about you kind of did your what was it again? Your undergrad degree was in
chemistry.
Chemistry, and you ended up in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And you're in finance now. What was kind of this long journey that kind of took you from undergrad to Malaysia to
science to Excel?
Yeah. Walk us a little bit.
Excel. I got my actual undergraduate degree. It was major in chemistry and my minor in kind of some sort of basic business type thing. Because even as I was finishing up, I realized that I wasn't really talented at chemistry. I was like, okay, it was interesting to me, and I've gotten through the curriculum. But I also figured out right before graduation that if you're going to be a chemist instead of a chemical engineer, you probably are going to go ahead and get your PhD. And I was like, I'm not that good at it. I'm not that interested in it. And so I started applying it to kind of a business perspective. Even it was my mindset even coming out of undergrad. So took a job with a...
Or you end up like Breaking Bad, right? If you're a chemist.
I suppose that's an option. It's always been a fallback plan. Got some ties in Central America. That's always good.
And the looks also,
Yeah, I would not mess with you.
Anyway, so I took a job with a environmental analytical chemistry firm in Houston when I got out of undergrad. Did that for a couple of years. Was in a rotation plan that was already kind of prepping you for hit the different hot spots and then get into management of the company kind of stuff. And in that process, we had an opportunity. We were doing a setup lab in the new territories of Hong Kong. One of my colleagues went out there and got it going, and then they were like, okay, he wanted to come back. It was getting close to the holidays, and they were looking for another person to be kind of voluntold to go. I raised my hand and went out there, met a bunch of people, did the work for a couple of months. And then the people I met were the people that ultimately ran the company in Asia, and they called me up maybe a month after I got back home, said, hey, we've got this opportunity in Malaysia. I would like for you to run our analytical chemistry division based in Kuala Lumpur. So it's my wife's an extremely adventuresome person.
Yeah.
And so she was I was on the phone. She knew the call was coming because we had talked we thought the call was coming. As soon as I was on the phone, we started having the conversation. She was pulling suitcases out of the closet and packing stuff. She was really
man, that's so cool.
Yeah. So we just had the one daughter at the time, but we packed up, moved to Malaysia. No idea how long we were going to be there. We thought we'd be there for probably a decade or so. And anyway, after a couple of years, the other side of the company was oil field services related. Oil prices dropped. Expats came home. I went to grad school.
Okay. Well, tell us about Malaysia. How old was your daughter, first of all?
Let's see. So she was...
this is 99.
Well, we left in 99. We got there in, I guess, 97. So she was about 7 or 8 at the time when we got there. So she had a couple of years there.
Okay. So then what was it like living in Kuala Lumpur, especially 20 years ago? Is probably different than now. Was it like a developed kind of place? Was it a big change in lifestyle?
Well, it's interesting the timing of this, because at the time they had their vision Dua Pua, which is 2020.
2020.
So, right? And their goal under the Prime Minister Mahathir at the time was, we want to have Malaysia be a first world nation by 2020. And they had their kind of plans on how do we get, we increase the population, what kind of foreign investment do we need to have, and all that kind of stuff. So it was an interesting time. I got there, I don't know, less than a year before the Southeast Asian economic crisis kind of wiped things out. So it made for some interesting business dynamics. Learned quite a bit in terms of dealing with the kind of challenges of currency devaluation. When you're a U.S.-based company and reporting in U.S. dollars and you're generating revenue in Malaysian ringgit.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was interesting. At the same time, they started having, as a lot of the countries at the time started having economic crisis lead to political crisis type of thing. And so Mahathir put his deputy prime minister in prison, Anwar, who, as I understand now, I've not really kept up, but Anwar is now out of prison. He's the deputy prime minister to Mahathir again, and Mahathir is going to, after he had retired, he came back, and now he's going to retire again, and Anwar is going to be a successor again. So it's like, we're just going in circles here. Yeah.
So was Petronas still there?
Petronas was still there. I could, from where I lived, I was on the kind of the west side of Kuala Lumpur. I could look out and see the Petronas towers as long as Indonesia wasn't burning their shred lines.
I went in 2013 to Petronas. It's such an amazing place. That entire, there's a big market around Petronas, which is lighted up. It's pretty spectacular.
Oh yeah, it's interesting the contrast between kind of the development of Kuala Lumpur versus like you don't have to drive far before you're in a very rural.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
But nice people. Good.
Did it change you in any way living in a different country?
I became a lot taller.
Was it the water or something like that?
I think it was, it was the pewter dishes we had. I don't know, I think anything like that gives you different perspectives. So I don't know that I could look back and say, what changed? It gave me a different perspective of some of the challenges that we have in the U.S. It was interesting, not to really divert, but the whole Rodney King thing happened while I was overseas, and so there was a lot of kind of like Malaysia talking to me about racism in the U.S. and it's like, oh yeah, we still have racism in the U.S. But it was interesting because in Malaysia they had kind of institutionalized racism. It wasn't like hate kind of racism, but it was racism from the perspective of the score you have to get like in your university differed depending upon your ethnicity to pass or something like that. And it was just some bank loans and stuff. It's just kind of weird, right? It's just it's weird. It was different than what I was used to. So it's interesting to see how different countries deal with things. But you have three very distinct and material populations between the indigenous Malay, not including the Orang Asli people, right, as well as the Chinese and Indian, right, groups within the country, and they've created their coalition. That's how they found their way through it. But anyway, it was definitely different than being in South Texas.
Yeah, it just shows you there's different ways that the world operates in different corners. So then when you came back and you went MBA back at A&M after that, what was kind of your thought process getting into, was it finance related at that point? Or?
No, I hadn't settled. I was really taking kind of the generalist approach through my MBA curriculum, and I thought I might even actually end up on the marketing side. But to be fair, my skill set was better suited for the analytical side, and I ended up with a job offer for a marketing position and one for finance with Compaq. And I didn't make the decision so much in terms of the nature of the role as in terms of function. I made the decision more so in terms of my fit for what that position was. So the marketing position was one of those kind of, you graduated from BA, we'll throw you in a pool with a bunch of other MBAs and you'll find your way kind of stuff at a big company. The finance opportunity was one where Compaq said, you're a really good fit for what we're going to want to do here. We want you for this role. And I thought that, to me, sounded like a more tangible path that would lead to better results long term.
Yeah. How do you approach like the role of finance? How do you think about, what's kind of the value add that you think that finance brings to the table?
I have a colleague, and I'll steal this from a former colleague in terms of his mindset of it, because I thought he articulated it pretty well. I think finance, the value that I like to try to bring from finance is, I'm not a finance person per se. I'm a business person who is responsible for the financials. Yes, we bring controllership. Yes, we're doing the accounting pieces of this. But I feel like finance gives you a perspective that is typically broader than people's typical silos that are their piece, right? And I think within AWS in particular, I see that all the time, right? Our business partners sometimes don't know how to talk to each other, what they need to be communicating, and finance sits back a little bit since we're not like actually doing the installation of the equipment, for example, in my space, to understand, wait a minute, you need to be considering these things and having those conversations. So to me, I feel like the role that I put my team in is really more one of, if this is your company, right, what are the decisions you want to make? And I think finance gives you that breadth of exposure where technically I'm not in charge, but I want to act like I'm driving the right business decisions from where
I'm more like connecting the dots,
Absolutely, right? Because we have the perspective, whereas a lot of the functions they're not part of the conversations because they're actually the ones down in the in the facilities doing that work.
Yeah.
Right. Like the business team has the responsibility to execute. We've kind of talked about that here before. They have to execute. They don't have the luxury to maybe stand back as much and connect
Sure,
the dots, you know,
sure.
because they've.
And finance helps with that, right?
That's-
We help
yeah.
with the communication. We also help with that perspective and bring in those perspectives when it's time to make a decision.
And I really like Brent's perspective. It's more like finance is actually like a business guy who knows the finance numbers, you know.
Right.
So
right.
rather than just being a finance guy, you know.
Right. You're,
So
you're kind of like a business person, but you're armed with a different set of weapons.
Yes.
Almost.
Well, it depends on what your role is, right, and what you want to do with your career. I've had these conversations with people as I've mentored people through the years. Some people want to be in more of the pure accounting finance. I want to prepare myself for treasury and corporate controllership and those types of things. Some of those roles, you know, you may not know that, you know, in terms of your day-to-day content, whether you're working at a bakery or a tech firm, right? Fine. But to the extent that you're drifting more towards business finance, right, then I think the boundary between business and finance in some of these roles becomes fuzzy. The key thing is to make sure that you're carving out and identifying how you can add value.
Yeah. What's kind of the general way you lead your team, and what do you, I don't know, how do you approach that? What's your philosophy? Because you have a team now that's also in different regions. So you
We're worldwide.
Yeah. What's your leadership philosophy with them? How do you approach that?
I really try to lead my team from kind of that perspective of empowerment. I really want them to feel like, hey, I'm for the people that are in country, they're the kind of geographic or regional controllers, right? I want them to look at everything and not say, this is what I'm responsible for. Look at the whole area, understand the things upstream and downstream, connect the dots, right? And I want them to be empowered to make the decisions because to the extent that I don't coach them to that degree or empower them to that degree, then the questions all come back to Seattle, and this is decentralized, it's inefficient, doesn't scale well. Especially if you don't have all the systems in place that are perfect. And occasionally we're a little bit short on that. So I think the empowerment piece of it is a really big portion of it. Try to give them the benefit of the doubt. If I can back their play on a particular issue, even though it may not have been the way I would have called it, I'll try to support that if there's any way I can make that work. So I think that's a big piece of it. I think another big piece of it is kind of aligned to the concept of the disagree and commit. I know that I don't have all the answers, but I have a perspective. So we got an issue in front of us. Here's what I'm thinking. You guys argue with me. Tell me where I'm wrong or question my assumptions. Tell me what you think and why, and let's debate it. And we'll learn as we have the discussion. It's not right versus wrong. It's how do we get to the best answer, and then we make that call. And it's not so much disagree and commit. It's let's wrestle with the problem, figure out the best answer, and then let's go do that. And let's try to do it as quickly as possible so that we can learn something from it and keep iterating.
Yeah. Did you find when you came to Amazon, was there anything that really surprised you about the way people interacted here? And
not even the people, like about the leadership principles also, like did something surprise you about that?
I've had this conversation with some of the people that I interview, and they ask me, what are some of the things that you would tell me that are going to surprise me if I get the job, or those types of questions. It's like there are certain aspects of certain leadership principles that we can communicate verbally, and I don't think really resonate until someone experiences it in situ, right? They're in the
that's
culture
deep.
and they
Yeah,
get it,
I
right?
agree with that.
And so there's like aspects of, like on the Earns Trust, right? Where we're like, hey, I'm not going to be defensive, and I'm going to, my body odor stinks just like everyone else's kind of thing. It's like, when you're sitting here getting your work just like peeled back, right? And they're just like, it's almost like a dissection. We're just like pulling back layers of, pretty soon you're at the bone, and at some point in time you say, I'm not a defensive person, but I'm starting to get that way. It's like, but Amazon culture really is one of those of, we're not criticizing you, we're surprised that you're getting upset. It's like, this is great, right? We're working towards this together kind of stuff. And so I think some of that's hard to translate until you experience it, and it takes some adjusting for people. I think the dive deep piece, it's hard to communicate exactly how deep dive deep is until you get here, right?
what's the
how
right
deep
level?
is deep?
Yeah, how do you know?
When you can't go any deeper, you're almost there, right? And it depends on, I'm sure it depends on the role. I came from
sorry to cut you. So on that aspect itself, so like Jeff B talks about, like you need 80% of the data to make a decision.
Sure.
So how do you correlate this with how deep is that deep of the dive?
The way I think about that is I may not need that information to make the decision, but that doesn't mean I've finished learning, because I'm going to need to go further. Right? And one of the things I would, being a little bit vocally self-critical, I bet I spent a year and a half really trying to figure out exactly what am I trying to get done in this job, in this role? I would have loved to have figured it out sooner, but I thought I knew, right? And you figure out over time, it's like you almost had it, right? You're getting closer as you go. But every year we figured out that the more information we have, the more it changes our perspective, and the more we find opportunities to go drive additional value, find cost savings, change processes. So, and you know, obviously, what we have available in terms of the depth of understanding, the granularity is different 2 years ago than what it is, you know, today, because we've helped drive that granularity and that visibility to a lower level. And so it's been part of what we've exercised, but it's interesting to find, you know, as I look back over 4 years, how things were versus what we have today, they're not even vaguely similar.
Well, you mentioned you spent the first year, was it that you were diving too deep, would you say? Is there something you would have changed about your first year if you're looking back now?
Oh yeah,
about
lots,
your
I'm
approach.
sure.
Yeah.
But I think when I got here, Patrick Scully hired me, and I think he rotated over to network like somewhere in the first 6 months I was here or something. I don't
He was the
remember
director in the
exact
CapEx space, the data center CapEx
well, yeah,
space.
he was SFM when I got here,
Right. Okay.
yeah. And we had a pretty small team. You know, I think if I am recalling the history that predates me correctly, you know, in AWS on the DCGS kind of side of the house, the data center portion, it really was more kind of shadow finance, business people, you know, like Leslie Curtis, you know, kind of putting in place some of that function, prior finance people, serving that function until finance got here. And, you know, I think a lot of that came with COSM. And then COSM brought in Patrick to spend more time here in the space. And we had a pretty small team. And right as I was getting here, we were actually transferring, if it was 3 or 4 people from the business side, kind of the business operations side, into finance. So we were kind of consolidating and putting the correct balance between business and finance in place.
I guess that goes like AWS was growing so fast that we didn't you kind of came in and there wasn't necessarily a previous process in place for what you had to come and do.
Yeah, and so what I was basically asked to do was basically establish a regional finance model, and we've been growing that kind of since then.
Yeah.
So we didn't have staff in Dublin. We did not have staff in Asia when I joined, and so those are some things that we've put in place. And so we've kind of built the team, developed the local engagement presence, and scaled it accordingly. So yeah, it took a while to kind of get to what that was going to look like, and part of that was me understanding, hey, you know, I was new to infrastructure, the hardware side, new servers, and a lot of the hardware that goes into data centers from my work at Hewlett-Packard, but didn't understand maybe all the designs of the data center, the process of that. So there was a whole process around learning and kind of diving deep in that space. And there's a lot of IP and there's a lot of technology in our data center design. So that took some time, as well as then trying to figure out, okay, what's this supposed to look like as we look out in the future, and figuring out that vision and getting us there took longer than I'm sure anyone would have liked, but I feel like we're on a good glide path at the moment.
Yeah.
So Brent would be like among the top 3 of duration spent in infra finance. Is that a fair statement? Like all?
I don't know that I have access to what the official scorecard is on that, but
COSM and
4 years
Patrick.
4 years in a space is like elderly in Amazon terms.
Cover the gray hair kind of thing.
I just mean that people rotated so much that you have probably now you probably seem like you're still ramping up, and meanwhile you're a statesman now in infrastructure.
Well, and I think that's a question you got to ask yourself as you go through your career, right? What am I trying to get out of my role, and am I getting what I want, right? And so I don't move for the sake of moving. You know, I like jobs where I'm helping drive business decisions. That takes a certain amount of investment in understanding how things work. And then once I'm there, right, have I accomplished what I want before I move to something else? And so I love the aspect of finance in that it's kind of a little bit of more easily transferable to kind of move from role to role. At the same times, you know, sometimes you do yourself a disservice depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your career if you move too quickly. So
just don't move for the sake of just moving.
Don't move for the sake of just moving.
I agree.
Make sure that you're, and I would say even within each kind of 6-month cycle, if I'm having career conversations with my people, what are we wanting to get out of this next 6 months of the year? Well, let's make sure that we're doing that, because if we're not, right, then we're going to look back and say this was time that I could have potentially spent better doing something else.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I dig kind of like the things you're able to do after a few trips around the sun in one place. You just have a deeper level of insight, a deeper level of how the dots are connected, and I think there's a value to that. You know, there's a value to moving and trying new things and being sort of like a utility, like cross-trained athlete, but there's something unique about having seen it a few times also that.
Sure, and it kind of depends upon your career objectives, right? If you want to, be the CFO, right, you need to hit a lot of different functions within finance or sub-functions, whatever the right term would be. On the other hand, I know I like helping drive business decisions, so I don't need to turn in treasury. At least I don't think I do yet.
Yeah. What do you think? 5 years, 10 years out. What do you think your career looks like? Your life. Do you think about things in those time horizons or?
Yeah, I believe very strongly in working kind of begin with the end in mind. So rather than do a PR FAQ, I look at it and say, okay, I know exactly how this ends with my corpse, and so let's work backwards from there, shall we? Not to be too somber with our response, but I need to be thinking about those things and back up to that and say, okay, how much time do I want to, assuming I have this type of duration, which no one knows. But
this is just the stuff we love on the show.
All right.
So tell us what that looks like. What do you kind of envision as sort of like the long-term horizon of your life?
For myself?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it and I'm saying, hey, I've done pretty well from an investment perspective. You never know what the market's going to be, right? But you kind of assemble, you're kind of like, I throw together a weekend spreadsheet and say, assuming historical rates of returns, what kind of expenditures do I want? When should those come in? What kind of inflation rate? So yeah, I've thrown some of those together. I haven't bothered with a certified financial retirement planner or whatever else at this point in time. But I've been fortunate enough that we started saving, married early, started saving very little paycheck to start with, but started saving right off the bat. Kept it in growth type of investment profiles, and I'm not sure that I necessarily need to work anymore. So what does that look like? Well, I need to go do something. I'm not going to sit around and collect seashells. So one of the things I like to do is I like to do projects around my house. So I'll go on vacation. I'm working in the house. I'm painting a room. I'm rewiring stuff. I'm putting up, putting in a patio or something like that. So I love doing those types of tangible things, kind of handyman type stuff. I like spending time in my kind of wood shop. I'll turn some wood or build some. I made my brother a set of dominoes from a piece of wood for his Christmas gift.
You built him a set of dominoes?
Man.
Yeah.
Like you cut individual dominoes?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a lot of precision,
I didn't like hand make each one. There was a template, and I drilled the holes based on a template, but then you cut each one off and you round the edges and paint the dots, and it's just a matter of time.
God.
I will want to find something to keep myself occupied with. So maybe I find a calling. I want to be a barista because I certainly drink a lot of coffee here. But whatever that is, right, at some point in time where it's like, okay, I need to rebalance and say I want to spend more time with my family instead of more time in the office. Let's look at that season in life. I'll plan that with my wife. Whether that's tomorrow or 10 years, I can't. Unless something really goes bad with the economy, it's not 10 years. But I'm kind of approaching that time window where we look at it and say, okay, how do I want to make sure that I exit through this? And then where do I want to spend my time? How can I add value to my community, at my church, with my family, obviously, and then spend time doing those things until I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah. So I guess what kind of stuff, like how would you approach like the stuff outside of work then? Do you have a philosophy on like, you spend time in the wood shop, you spend time outside? Like, I don't know, what does the transition look like from working at AWS, which is, that's a full-time, in all the sense, full-time occupation of your mind and your energy towards pairing it towards another project.
How do you switch gears, like it's very...
I haven't done it yet, but my mindset, my theory at the moment, which may prove false, right, is it's not that I'm going to go to, I'm now a full-time woodworker or, but I think it's what is your kind of second career, right? And I'm assuming that, right, things go well and I'm able to financially not have to, be in the rat race, if you will. But if I want to move to a kind of slower pace, maybe start my own kind of company doing a certain thing, or, I guess worst case scenario, like a barista, a Walmart greeter, or whatever. But I think it's one of those things where you look at where do I want to spend my time and give back, but kind of invest that time, right? So, if I retire and create my own little business and I grow that a little bit, right, I'm sure that will keep me, get my Amazon juices redirected towards something like that.
Right.
So that's
something.
I haven't figured out what that other career might be, which is why I'm not in a hurry. And besides, we got so much cool stuff still to do here. But at some point in time, right, it'll be flip over that. And if I haven't figured out what that is, that's when I think if I'm not sure where I'm spending my time, I'm going to end up with my house really, really well set up, and then I'm going to be going like, all right, now what? I'll be in a little bit of trouble. My wife will be probably going like, you got to go find something because you're driving me nuts.
Yeah, I think there's a value into like you plant this in the subconscious and let that sort of sort out the puzzle pieces over time.
Over time, right? I mean, these are things you probably can't. Maybe I'll have an epiphany and I'll be like, aha!
Right.
I need to be a door-to-door salesman or something. But whatever, unless something like that lightning strikes, you work at it over a number of years, and when time's right, you'll figure it out.
Yeah. What is your kind of philosophy that you sort of like that you might impart to your children or would impart to other people who are sort of on their journey? Do you have a kind of
people who are just starting, in their career, like I think what you are saying makes a lot of sense, from a very long-term perspective. So how will you advise somebody who's just starting up?
Well, I would say, okay, on some practical matters, right, I do think it's important to kind of, work from the end backwards, right? And so obviously address the fact that, this life ends. So figure that stuff out. Working backwards from that, if you're worrying about retirement, definitely start saving early, right? I mean, compound interest is a wondrous thing. You may not like calculating it, but I like what it does.
Eighth wonder of the world.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, but kind of during the season of practical things is I would tell my daughters, tell them all the time, I would tell anyone else, this world tends to be a little bit deceitful with their marketing spiel. Like this idea that you can have it all, you can do it all, that's a lie. You can't. There's only, you can only be in one place and you can only focus on so much at a time. So prioritize, figure out what's important to you, and make sure that you're spending time on that. We talk about work-life balance or whatever the current catchphrase is on that or whatever else. Just make sure that you know what's important to you and you're figuring out, or at least you're consciously making decisions, understanding what the trade-offs are on that. It may be like, hey, we're heads down in OP2 and I'm going to have to compromise on how much time I want to spend on something that's important to me on the short period. Great, but you know that you're doing it and you know what's important to you still, and you'll rectify that on the backside of that temporary abnormality. That's okay, but if you find yourself perpetually doing things that are not aligned with your priorities, that's a recipe for stress and general unhappiness.
Yeah, I think just being deliberate about thinking about what's important.
But I do think that especially since I have daughters, right? I try to make sure they understand. Look, you can absolutely have a career. You can absolutely be, a spouse, a mother, whatever you want to do, right? Just understand. It's impossible to be in two places. So just make those decisions carefully. I remember being on a panel with some other, I was director at HP, and they were broad audience, people asking people questions or whatever else. And someone was posed the question of, how do you do both, right? It's like, I like to think that I'm really good at parenting, and I am also this finance person. I question in the back of my head, not saying that this person wasn't good at both. It's like, if you're working 80 hours a week, and I know this person was working 80 hours a week, how are you also spending? You may be a really good parent for the time that you have to be a parent, right? But how are you parenting during that time window? So I think, practical advice. Doesn't mean you can't do both. I'm not telling people they can't be a parent and try to be a CFO of a Fortune 500 company by the time they're 50 or whatever else. But understand your trade-offs on that as you're going down that path.
And don't kid yourself with what you're trying to do.
There are trade-offs on this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Even when we started talking about university days, right? You start off as a freshman in university. It's like you can choose from all of this, right? You start taking your classes and like, okay, for me to go back and become, particle physicist, right? I am changing my course or curriculum. My window in terms of options based on what I have done has, narrowed. So in order to go, get to something else, right? You're going to have to reverse some decisions, right? And I think we see that in life, but we sometimes tell ourselves as we're pursuing our career and stuff, I don't know how much of that's the marketing spiel in terms of we want to sell you this type of thing, or how much of that's us self-deluding ourselves. But I think if anyone that pauses a little bit recognizes that there's trade-offs to the decisions.
Were you always this aware of how you like deliberately carried yourself, or did it come to you in pieces?
Oh, I'm sure it came to me painfully, but I don't know that I remember the journey.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I have this weird mindset that I don't spend a lot of time on reflection of history. It's not like I don't remember my anniversary or something like that, or my kids' birthdays, but I do not find myself dwelling on how last year went or the year before. And even as we get together on team events and we're like, getting together team planning for the next year and that kind of stuff, it's easy for me to say, here's how we achieved, performed in terms of achieving goals that we set for ourselves last year. But it's not in my nature to just automatically document and celebrate successes. So I have to be deliberate on that. Otherwise, it's kind of like, it's always what's next. It's not like glass is not half full, half empty kind of thing. It's more like, how can I get another drop kind of thing.
But Brent comes out as a very wise guy who has figured everything out, sort of.
No. I know that I don't know everything.
Maybe that's the wisdom, because there is a comfort in sort of like the way that you're talking. There's a comfort that you've got some things figured out.
Yeah.
And maybe it's that awareness that you don't know everything, and that being honest with yourself that what you're deciding to do is trade-offs. And I think maybe that's the wisest thing that you can have, is being aware of how much you don't know. And it's kind of you have to be kind of humble to do something.
I think humility is a really good principle for life in general, right? And we see this again. Not to sound like I'm banging too much the Amazon horn, although earnings are tomorrow, and hopefully that gives us a nice tailwind towards retirement. But within Amazon, right, we have a little bit of kind of a humility type of culture. The expectation is that we don't know everything. Ask the question. We don't give ourselves a big honeymoon period here. I guess it's like 2 to 6 weeks, and then you're expected to figure it out. But even within that culture, especially within finance, where you're questioning your business partners, it's a really good approach to ask, why is it this way? It seemed like it ought to be this way, right? And that's an easier sell than you're wrong, and starting the debate that way. But I think that's useful when you're working across your own management chain. Gretchen, why is it this way? Or Kozum, why is it this way? I would have thought this. And it's okay to recognize that you don't know everything. Everyone else already knows that you don't know everything. So just jump on board and let's ask the question.
Yeah, own it. Just own it.
There you go.
Is there anything that you might want to share that we haven't covered at all? Any type of general philosophy or wisdom that could be useful to people listening?
Oh, no, I think we've gotten too philosophical already. We should probably cover some really lightweight topics.
Yeah. Tell us one thing that we usually ask people that come on is like, what do you? What do you consume like outside of work for content? Do you like read fiction or documentaries or news?
Yeah. So I'm kind of I'm a weird mix of kind of like intense and goofy. So when it comes down to like books and like trying to learn stuff. I like reading. I read a lot of religious material, and I read a lot of history, biography type of stuff.
Right.
And if I can't read it, I'll do the Audible thing, and I listen to someone else read it to me. That's really efficient.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
Is there a particular like biography recently that stuck out?
I haven't hit a biography recently. I just did a really good book on Midway that I thought was really interesting. But one of the really kind of
Midway was like around like the South Pacific and the World War II.
I wasn't alive. Don't ask me.
No.
I wasn't there. So that battle, they had a couple of really good books. I think that some of those became more marketed since they just did another film or something. But there was a really good kind of a historical novel called Empire of the Summer Moon. And it's about the Comanche Indians, primarily in the Texas area.
Wow.
It gives an amazing interest, I think, for having lived there for a number of years. Kind of like, what was this like not too long ago? And we tend to think that, this, if we look out the window, is the way it's been. It's like has not been this way for long.
Yeah.
Certainly in that space. And you think about the population of Texas, and I think the metropolitan area of like Houston was like somewhere over 6-8 million or something like that in that greater area. It's like I don't think that there were 8 million people living in the entire state, when around 1900.
Yeah.
And if you've ever lived there, I mean, they didn't have air conditioning at the time. I don't know how you could live there. Anyway, you'd need air conditioning and fire ant killer, otherwise it's not habitable.
I think that studying history is like one of the most important things, just to understand that the way
Perspective,
it is not always perspective. It's not always.
So that's the serious side. But like when I go home and I'm like trying to relax, I don't like go straight to serious. Like I'll tend to watch either, if there's TV, I'll try to hit something that's a sporting event because I don't know how you don't know the theme or the plot, right? But otherwise, we're watching movies, and they're typically not like heavy movies. We're watching things like something with a bit of humor and a little bit of wit to it. Like we like my daughter and I like to watch a bunch of movies. We like the Cornetto trilogy, if you guys know Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. So like Shawn of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End is I think the last one. That anyway. Just something that you can watch over and over again because it's funny, but it doesn't like draw you in and it's not emotionally taxing.
Yeah.
It's like
It's
it's like a steam release valve, and then when I got time away and the family's not available, I head to the shop or start painting a room or something like that.
Right on. There's one other question we always ask people.
Yeah.
What are 3 historical figures if you could like have lunch with? Who would you?
Yeah, I saw that on your list. I got nothing. So historical figures, I was like,
Or any person,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I were to say, hey, this is your last meal, who you want to spend time having dinner with, it would be family members.
Yeah.
So I won't bore you with the specific family members because it won't be, that's too much context, but it'll be family members. So I don't look back and say, hey, I want to have a conversation with Gandhi or Abraham Lincoln. Popular culture stars, not whatever. I'd rather visit with someone I know, and
Yeah.
that would be the way to go.
Yeah. Are you kind of like more of a one-on-one person, or are you like an extrovert? Would you say in the?
I am. I like one-on-one, and I like small groups. So I mean, if we had 5 or 6 people in here and we were having dinner or whatever else, I would be all in on the conversation. But if you turn it into an audience of like 50 people or something, like the small auditorium type stuff, you would never see me like as a motivational speaker. It's like, nah.
Yeah.
Small groups where we get a chance to dialogue, because I like the benefit of feedback, right?
Yeah.
I like the opportunity for people to question and have debate on stuff.
Yeah.
Constructive debate. I don't like arguing for the sake of arguing.
I love it. Yeah. With a purpose, talking with a purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very, very deep, actually.
I think this has been extremely deep. Might be a good place to end on for now. And,
all right.
Brent, just want to say thanks for spending the time with us.
Thanks a lot.
I'm deeply honored that you guys even cared to have the conversation with me in the first place.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that.
This was awesome,
We've been
actually.
highly intrigued for a while, and you came requested, so it's not just us, but I think people are going to like it.
I hope so. Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Cool.
Yo, what up, everybody?
Thanks,
Thanks for tuning into the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Feel free to leave a rating, a review, what have you, but most of all, go have a fantastical day. Okay? We'll see you soon. Goodbye.